Welcome to Lesson 44 on Anonymous Methods, Part 3. Part 3 covers anonymous procedures using an example based on the iterator design pattern. Lesson 44 is based on Chapter 44 in the book How to Program Effectively in Delphi for AS A-Level Computer Science. To illustrate an anonymous procedure, I have chosen a simple Delphi example which is based on the iterator design pattern. This example program makes use of a dynamic array. A dynamic array is an array which has dimensions that are set dynamically, i.e. at runtime, by calling the set length standard procedure. Dynamic arrays are allocated memory from the heap. The program defines a dynamic array type T example array using the keyword T array and these two chevrons and the keyword integer. A dynamic array is an array which is created at runtime. Dynamic arrays are allocated memory from the heap. The element type of the array is integer, and we actually need a variable which is actually a reference type. It will hold the address of the block of memory that constitutes the array. So we need a variable, my data of type T example array, and we actually need to create this array when the program executes using the by using the set length standard procedure. And the block of memory address is assigned to the variable supplied here as the first parameter, and then the size of the array is specified with the second parameter. So this array, dynamic array my data, will be allocated 4 elements, with each element being of type integer. Now, dynamic arrays are zero index, which means that the index of the first element is 0, the second element is 1, the third element is 2, and because there are only 4 elements, the last element is index 3. Now we're going to put some data into this dynamic array using a for loop, so that we don't have to refer to the first element explicitly. We're going to use the function low and apply this to argument my data, and this will return 0. So the starting value of j will be 0. And similarly, so that we don't have to refer explicitly to the highest index value, we're going to use the high function with argument my data, which will actually in this case return 3. So the for loop will loop from 0 to 3, and then we're just going to store the integer value 4 into each of the cells of the array. Now let's have a look at procedure iterate, which is going to take as input a dynamic array of type T example array, and it's going to take a second input which is an anonymous procedure. Now Delphi supplies this identifier tproc, which is declared as a reference to a generic procedure. I mean, we could have defined a procedure reference in the same manner as we defined a type for a function reference in the previous lessons, but I've decided to use the generic procedure named tproc, and this will be a procedure with a single parameter of type integer. So in the body of iterate, we're going to loop from the first element to the last element of this dynamic array, and we're going to apply the iterator procedure to each element of this dynamic array by passing each element in turn to the iterator anonymous procedure. Okay, so let's have a look at a call to this procedure in the main begin end block. The call is here, so we're calling iterator with the dynamic array which whose elements are all integer value 4, and then the second parameter, actual parameter, has to be an anonymous procedure with a single integer formal parameter. So this is what we've supplied here. So the keyword procedure, and then we defined a single formal parameter of type integer, and then in the body we're adding the actual parameter that will be passed when this procedure is executing. It will be passed and referenced by the formal parameter value and added to an integer variable called sum, and then sum will be updated with this calculated value. Now sum is of type integer and it's been initialized here. So value will be a bound variable, as we've discussed before, because it comes in through the procedure interface here, but sum must come in from what I described before as the lexical environment. So it's going to get sum from outside this anonymous procedure. So the value that it will use on the first call will be 0, because 0 will be bound to this free variable sum when the procedure executes for the first time. So this is an anonymous procedure which is passed by procedure reference. This is the dynamic array, and we would expect, after iterate has iterated through every value of the dynamic array, for sum to hold the sum of the elements of this dynamic array. So since there are 4 elements and each element stores the value 4, the result stored in sum should be 16. So when we write it out here at this point here, we should observe 16 in the console window. So let's run the program and see if we actually do get 16. Here we are in the IDE for Delphi 10.4, and we have the program simplified iterator project that I described in the previous slide. We've got a dynamic array type T example array. We have set up the length of the dynamic array to be 4 elements of type integer. We've initialized the array with value 4 in each element, or for each element, or in each cell. We've got a variable sum which we've initialized to 0, and then we call procedure iterate, which takes two parameters, formal parameter data, which is a type T example array, and formal parameter iterator, which is a reference to an anonymous procedure. And we apply this anonymous procedure to each element in turn of the array. So we call iterate at this point here with the actual parameter my data and the actual parameter for the anonymous procedure, procedure value integer, which basically accumulates the sum of the elements of the array my data, and then we output sum to the screen. So without further ado, let's compile and run the program. And indeed we get the result 16 written to the console window. Let's try changing the value of the integer stored in each element of the array. So let's make it 10, and therefore we'd expect the result stored in sum and written to the console window to be 4 times 10 is 40. So if we compile again, indeed we get 40. So let's change the size of the dynamic array to 6. So now we're working with a 6 element array and storing 10 in each element, and then iterating over each element and accumulating the sum. So if we compile and run, we get the answer 60, 6 elements, each element storing 10, 6 times 10 is 60, as expected. Up next is Lesson 44, Anonymous Methods Part 4. Thank you for listening.